All right, so let's put this to the test and take a look at them. We'll start with interpolation. So we're going to go here in JavaScript, and we're going to add a variable such as num, type number, and we're going to set that the value of 7, and there we are. So we created our number. Now let's go to our template after the h4 tag and just add a span tag here. In the middle of the span tag, I'm going to print the num variable that we defined in our class. And to do this with interpolation, if you remember, we use the curly brackets to wrap that variable around. There it is. And that's it. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to switch over to our browser. And now we can see the number 7. Awesome. So I'm going to switch back for a moment and just touch on one quick thing, which is we can add filtering on these things. So for perhaps, let's say this wasn't number. This was an array of numbers. And so let's create an array here. There we go. And now if we print it as is, it will give me the numbers. And if you see here, it just gives me a comma. So it just kind of prints the values. But perhaps as I'm building this, I want to see all the content of that variable, whatever it might be, num or array or whatever it is. So we can use these pipes here and filters, essentially. They're called pipes now here in Angular 2. And give it, for example, the type of JSON. And so what this does is it takes num and it will print it as a JSON object. And you can do certain things like if you have a number and you want to print it as a currency, you can use currency, and you can even get in-depth detail about currency and date. So it's very helpful. But I'm going to do this for JSON just to show that here in the browser now I can see that variable as a JSON object. So we can really just kind of see how it's broken down, and maybe we want to just see the part of the properties we want to touch and such. So go back on here. So that's interpolation. And again, we don't need that, but it's just nice for us to know that it exists. And it's very effective to help us format these variables. So now we're done with our interpolation. Let's do the event binding. So I'm going to erase that. I'm going to erase this. And up here, I'm going to add a button. So here's a button. And we'll say on the button here, click me. Save it. Make sure it comes up on our browser. To the left, it auto refreshes for me. And there it is. There's a button. If I click on it right now, there's no event happening because I really didn't give it an event.
You just did it in a button.
That's exactly right. So now we're going to add the event right on the button, which is really nice. We're going to put parentheses here to imply that it's an event, and we're going to put the event of click on the button. And we're going to furthermore say that when this button is clicked, I want it to do something. It will just evaluate this expression here. So what we can tell it to do is invoke a function, execute a function, right? Run a block of code. So I'm going to create a function called onClick. It's kind of a generic name. You can name it anything you want. And we need to do parentheses here to invoke the onClick function when this button here has been clicked. So in our code here, perhaps after these functions here, I'm going to add here a onClick function. And that's just because I named it onClick here. These two, as long as I use the same name, could be anything. It could be X. I mean, obviously you want it to be something that's relevant to what you're doing, but if there's
don't call it X.
Right, definitely don't call it X, but it is a key word that it is the word that I'm using. So they have to be the same here. All right, so let's put on here alert. Button clicked. And so now what we should see is that if I click on this button, which is click me, it's going to invoke the onClick function. And the onClick function has been written in our class here. And it should run line 19, which is alert, every time I click on the button. So let's give that a shot. There's a button, has already refreshed for me. So I'm going to click on this, and there's the alert. And so every time I click on this, we get the alert. As you can imagine, this same pattern can happen on any other properties we may add on here. And just to show here, as opposed to click, we'll say mouse enter, which is another event we can tie into this HTML element. Go back to our browser, hover over it, and immediately came up. So every time now I hover over without clicking, it invokes the function. Awesome. So we saw interpolation and we saw event binding. Let's take a look at two-way binding. So two-way binding is kind of, as we saw earlier, putting the two together. So I'm going to start off with just the input, as we saw earlier, and give it the syntax we saw with ng model. And inside of the ng model, we're going to set a variable. Now, we have not defined a variable at all here in our JavaScript yet. So, by the way, let me get rid of this. We don't need that anymore. Let's only use what we need. So let's create a variable that we want to change as we change the input value and also kind of track it as it goes. So we're going to say here sample. We're going to be a type of string, and let's predefine it to be an empty string. There it is. And let's set ngModel to be the string sample, string variable named sample. So there it is. So what this will do for me is that every time I modify the input, the content of the input, it's going to redefine the sample variable to that data. And the same thing as if I had some kind of event in our JavaScript here that modifies sample, we would also see it change on our template. So right under the input tag, I'm going to add a span tag, and I'm going to add interpolation and just get my variable sample to print right under the input. So I just want to show that as we change the input, we should also immediately see the sample tag here, or excuse me, the span tag with the sample variable change immediately, like in real time. Let's go here, let's switch over, and let's start typing here. Hello, world. And there it is. You've probably seen this if you have been looking at Angular before. It's kind of the popular two-way binding, but again, it's kind of a simple feature that just checks to see when something changes, it triggers that update.